In these clips, we see F-6F Hellcats attacking Betty bombers on their way to deploy Baka kamikaze aircraft against a US Naval task force. The task force-based Carrier Combat Air Patrol Fighters, or CAP, were the first line of defense against kamikaze aircraft. CAP was responsible for shooting down around 60% of suicide aircraft deployed. The intent of this video is to review kamikaze pilot experience, tactics suicide planes adopted to avoid CAP, tactics the CAP adopted in finding and attacking suicide planes, and CAP's overall combat effectiveness. This is the channel's 10th video covering ship, anti-aircraft gun sights, fire control directors, and picket destroyers and carriers versus kamikazes. These videos reside in the channel's Ship Armaments and Kamikazes playlist. Kamikaze attacks were by far the greatest threat U.S. naval ships faced during World War II, as discussed on this page from a 1946 United States Strategic Bombing Survey report on Japanese air power in World War II. Over a 10-month period from October 1944 and on, suicide attackers accounted for 48% of all warships damaged and 21% of those sunk. The Japanese paid a price, though. The Japanese lost 2,550 planes in these attacks, scored 474 hits on all ship types, for an effective strike rate of 18.6%. Kamikaze attacks were 3 to 4 times more combat effective as conventional bomb or torpedo attacks. The fleet, reacting to this threat, revised their early warning systems, ships' anti-aircraft firepower and tactics, and combat air patrol quantity and tactics. This page from a 1970 Center of Naval Analysis document on the defense against kamikaze attacks describes the sorry state of the kamikaze pilots' training. Early engagements took their toll on the Japanese pilot corps. Air groups were decimated during the Battle of Midway and the Rabaul battles. By the summer of 1944, U.S. naval aviators entered combat with at least 24 months of training and 300 hours of flight time. By this time, the 3 Japanese air groups were flying in combat with between 2 to 6 months' worth of training. By war's end, pilot experience had been reduced to around 100 hours. Kamikaze pilots had flown only 30 to 50 hours before being sent on a mission. In later kamikaze attacks, veteran pilots would fly with the kamikaze pilots for escort protection and perform the group's navigation. Due to the low pilot experience levels, missions were generally not flown at night. This chart outlines the Japanese pilot experience as the war progressed. As of December 1941, IJN pilots started the war with 500 hours of experience, and IJA pilots with 700 hours of experience. By war's end, the experience level had progressively dropped to 100 hours. This area plot chart shows the number of planes the Japanese allocated to conventional attacks and kamikaze attacks. The first dedicated suicide attack occurred in October 1944. Suicide attack tactics needed to be simplified as the level of pilot training declined. During the Philippine campaign, a kamikaze attack was comprised of 6 planes, 3 suicide attackers, and 3 escorts. Later in the Okinawan campaign, tactics shifted to mass attacks to overwhelm and split CAP and ship defenses. The escorts were included in the formation to decoy and draw off the CAP. Escorts were instructed not to scrap with the CAP if the engagement would leave the kamikaze planes unprotected as they continued towards the ships. When the speed performance of the planes was equivalent, then the escorts would not engage the CAP. U.S. aviators described this tactic during the Battle of the Philippine Sea. Japanese planes did not seem to have a coordinated defense. They scattered. This left them vulnerable to fighters. The escort fighters did not protect the bombers. They maneuvered to escape the Hellcats. This page from an August 1945 anti-suicide summary report document describes how the kamikaze attacker avoided CAP. The goal of the kamikaze is to crash his plane into the ship. Every effort is directed in avoiding CAP fighters. This includes flying to the target at either a very high altitude, above 20,000 feet, or at a low altitude. Planes were painted camouflage to blend into the sea or sky. When CAP approached, the Japanese formation planes separated, using the sun or clouds as cover. At 10 miles from the task force, the planes at high altitude would vector at a 20-degree dive angle towards its target. This page and chart from a 1945 suicide attack against ships document outlines kamikaze formation altitudes of approaches between October 1944 and January 1945. For most attacks, the formations were bound by the solid lines in the chart as shaded here. The kamikaze formations were usually radar sighted at a distance around 75 miles out from the task force. At a ground speed of 200 knots, the kamikaze formations will be at the target in 20 minutes. This chart outlines visual distances a pilot can see based on altitude from a 1944 Air Combat Information Manual. For unlimited visibility conditions, a pilot at 20,000 feet should see out to 173 miles. A large task force may be visible at a distance of 75 miles depending on atmospheric visibility conditions. If approaching the target at low altitude, the planes would use landmasses as radar concealment. To further reduce cap engagements, kamikaze planes have been attacking at twilight, coming from the direction of darkness. Towards the latter part of the war, kamikaze planes shifted to approaching the target at lower altitudes. The benefits of this change in tactic include less radar and visual detectable by ships and planes. CAP may be less likely to attack as low-altitude surface engagements are more risky. Ships may not fire due to the risk of friendly fire. Increased likelihood of a target strike than a high-altitude dive attack. Altitudes of attack are between 40 and 50 feet, so low that propeller sea wash can be seen. US Naval doctrine is to vector cap planes to the bogey threat when it is within 100 miles of the task force, as described on this page from an August 1945 Anti-Suicide Action Summary Report, a review of kamikaze engagements from October 1944 to February 1945 shows the further away of the engagement from the fleet, the higher likelihood of reducing the number of planes that reach the task group, even if the cap is outnumbered. The two factors to consider with regard to engagements that occur far from the task force include CAP will shoot down 60% of kamikazes in the formation. Oddly, the number of planes shot down does not increase dramatically if more CAP is sent. Note that kamikaze CAP kill rates will vary with source from 45 to 60%. Planes dispersed from the CAP attack have little chance of reaching the fleet if the scatter distance was greater than 50 miles from the task force. The likelihood of reaching the ships increases as the CAP intercept distance decreases. This chart outlines the percentage of kamikaze planes that reach the task group based on the distance intercepted and the ratio of cap to enemy planes. For example, at an intercept distance of 20 miles, 31% of kamikazes will reach the task force, even if the cap is outnumbered 4 to 1. At an intercept distance of 50 miles, only 2% of kamikazes will reach the task group. This does not imply cap shot down 98% of the Japanese planes. Some were shot down, maybe 60%, 2% reached the task force, and the remainder dispersed and did not reach the task force. The trend is clear. The farther away CAP intercepts the enemy formations, the less likely kamikaze planes will reach the task force, and when interception is made, the attacks are catastrophic to the attacking formations. In most interceptions, the kamikaze formations broke up when tally-hoed and the planes headed to the deck or clouds for safety. Tally-ho is defined as the interceptor has a visual on the enemy aircraft, as defined on this page from a July 1944 CIC document. The majority of enemy planes offered little resistance and were shot down, around 60%. The remaining 40% escaped and headed on the deck or in the clouds. The escaping planes were trying to reach the main task force. The ability to reach the target is based on the distance of intercept. At a distance of 50 miles or greater, the likelihood is low, whereas at a distance of 25 miles, the majority will reach the task force. CAP will also re-engage some of these escapees. The main reason for not reaching the task force is the pilot's lack of navigation skills. The average range of interception is 35 miles. A kamikaze will reach the task force in 9 minutes at a 35-mile distance. Most kamikaze aircraft were destroyed by CAP intercepts. Fighter sweeps of airfields became more prevalent, where Navy fighters like the Hellcat and Corsair would conduct strafing runs like seen in this image. This chart outlines the number of plane types carried by fleet carriers. The percentage of fighters increased with a reduction in torpedo bombers, as is evident by the fighter trend line here. Fleet carriers carried 15 fighters at the start of the war and ended the war with 70 fighters. The biggest shortcoming in interception was the ability of the ship's radar to accurately vector the cap to the enemy formations, as discussed on this page. Enemy planes were almost always detected 75 miles out from the fleet, and a cap unit was vectored to intercept. However, in many cases, no enemy planes existed at the vectored location. The Navy found ship-based height-finding radars produced inaccurate readings. Radar-based height values given to CAP were incorrect. This was due to its antenna out of alignment or operators not properly trained to use the equipment. An error of 1,000 feet in enemy formation altitude could explain why many intercepts did not occur. In summary, the key to a successful CAP engagement is kamikaze formation interception at long range. The formation was usually identified at 75 miles from the task force, and CAP intercepted it at 35 miles from the task force. If CAP intercepted the kamikaze formation, it shot down around 60% of the planes. Those that escaped would not likely reach the task force if interception took place beyond 50 miles. Many intercepts were missed due to vectoring the cap to a wrong altitude. This was due to a misaligned altitude radar antenna and/or inadequate crew training. If you have found this human-produced CAP combat effectiveness against Kamikaze's deep dive review interesting and informative, please consider commenting, liking, and/or subscribing to World War II U.S. Bombers.